east of Lake Charles, and the center of Hurricane Delta came between Lake Charles and here in Jennings. So the good news with Lake Charles is they were on the so-called weaker side of the storm, but this storm was quite unique. We had strong, gusty, damaging winds, even over 90, 100 miles per hour, as far west as Texas on the so-called weaker side. So every storm is unique, and this one definitely had all types of kind of tricks up its sleeve as well. Right now you can see behind me, this road recently cleared, but farther down the road, you can see the caution tape, another tree down, and even that's a power pole. You see the top kind of snap there of that power pole has yet to be kind of cleared. We've noticed a lot of crews out here. Energy crew cleared off a tree that was hanging on power poles just behind my camera location, and they've been busy and working trying to restore at least the clear streets. Some of these homeowners, they were kind of locked in with these trees kind of crossing the road for hours this morning since they really came down late last night. Good news is, barely a cloud in the sky, a little light breeze, just enough to keep some of the mosquitoes off of us, which are out in droves right now. But now the cleanup continues. And if there's any bright spot, it is what happened 6 weeks ago with Hurricane Laura. So there are tons of power crews, tons of communication crews from cell towers to telephone companies trying to quickly restore power. Power is out here. We lost it at our hotel last night. It just came on, but we're closer to I-10. Farther south of I-10, where we have more substantial impacts of flooding, bayou waters still kind of high, and all these strong winds. It might take a few more hours, if not a few more days, to get power restored here. So once again, we've taken a pretty big blow here, but yeah, they've come together after Laura. They'll come together now after Delta as we continue to move forward here in this crazy year. And the sad thing is, we're still only early October. October is still kind of a secondary peak in terms of hurricane season activity. And if you remember, if you're in the Northeast, Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy, that was a late October system. So we are not out of the woods, although right now we're enjoying this break after we had landfall just last night. Let's go back to the studio with Dr. Mostel, and you got more video I know you're watching of what some of the impacts Delta brought last night.
Yeah, we saw lots of wind reports in the 75 to 95 mile per hour range across southern Louisiana and parts of eastern Texas. Now we're still dealing with some pretty significant wind in this part of the circulation, but there's another part we have to pay attention to, and that is that part. So there's like a couple of pieces here, and they're all connected, but with the core of what's going on here in parts of Mississippi and Louisiana, still some pretty strong winds with a shot at some 50+ mile per hour wind gusts and potential damage here and there. Right now, there's some of those wind gusts of 30 to 40 generally across the region, but gosh, it wasn't long ago where we saw in Jackson, Mississippi earlier today, wind gusts over 50 and lots of reports of downed trees and power lines in northeastern Louisiana and parts of western Mississippi. The other part of this circulation overall that we got to pay close attention to is this line of showers and some thunder and lightning in there, but it's in an environment that will support some brief spin-ups, and we got to watch out because there is still a tornado watch out for this part of Alabama and Florida until 1 o'clock local time. So that's about another hour and a half or so. Elsewhere, farther to the northeast, it looks like now a tornado watch will be coming our way. Not a guarantee, but probably in this zone, which does extend from the metro Atlanta area all the way southward to the I-10 corridor in North Florida. That is associated with the weather that it's going to get worse as this line approaches. Imagine this line coming in. It's doing so in an environment that will support some rotation in those thunderstorms with pronounced wind shear. We got some low-level winds that look like that. Upper level winds that look like that. That's a pretty big difference, and that combination, along with the limited instability, though sufficient, will support the notion that these storms could produce tornadoes. So that is why we've got Torcons of 3. Watch out, there may be a tornado watch coming in the next hour or two. Stay tuned to the Weather Channel for all the continuing coverage on Delta.
1 in 2 kids is underhydrated. All new plant-powered Creative Roots gives kids the hydration they need with the fruit flavor.
Welcome back to Weekend Recharge, and you're looking at video from Cyphermore Point there in Vermilion Bay in coastal Louisiana as storm surge came onshore. Again, that was the right front quadrant, so they're seeing a pretty big push of water coming in from the Gulf of Mexico right in that bay, and huge waves. And Cypress-Moore Point, it's kind of out there, and they were hit pretty hard with those strong waves, even though they were probably maybe 80 miles from the landfall point. But as Hurricane Delta approached the Gulf Coast, it started to expand, that wind field expand against the winds that create the waves. In fact, the winds here in Jennings, Louisiana, welcome back to Weekend Recharge, I'm meteorologist Paul Goodlow. The winds here were gusting well over 80 miles per hour last night. We had hours of 65 to 80 mile per hour wind gust as that eye wall came through here. We're fairly close to center point, within 10 miles. So we were in some of the strongest winds last night. You see some of the damage of these trees. The road crews just came out here the last hour or so to clear out this road. Now people can drive up it, but you can see, I mean, these are substantially big old trees. So we're talking maybe, you know, at least 30-year-old pine trees. Granted, pine trees, it's a softer wood, but look at the root ball structure. This is where they came up. They didn't just kind of snap. They were pulled over and pushed over by the strong winds. And we've had a lot of rain here. In fact, we were showing you this earlier. I can still see just below the grass level nothing but still and standing water here, because we've had 6 to maybe 12 inches of rain in this area. And it started raining early yesterday morning and rained really up until early this morning, and then the skies cleared. But it was the soggy ground and the strong winds that came through, and we do believe this one was probably weakened earlier by these trees falling from the northern eye wall. The backside winds shifted from the west. That is west direction, the wind's coming from that direction and through this tree down over the road with other trees as well. So the cleanup continues here. And again, this is the second time in not even 2 months that we're doing more cleanup. When Hurricane Laura made landfall west of here, we also had a lot of trees down. Fortunately, these did not land on any of these homes here. Otherwise, it'd be a whole different level of cleanup. Well, we also have cleanup underway east of here. It has head to Scott, Louisiana, where Mike Seidel is. And you too had quite a bit of a wind show last night. You had gusts, what, up to 70, 75 miles per hour, Mike?
Yeah, 75, not as strong as there. And you had the strongest winds for a longer period of time in that eye wall. So you have more trees down than here in Scott. We're just on the west side of Lafayette by about 15 minutes. Let's bring in the police chief, nice enough to come back after the storm. Police Chief Chad Leger, right here in Scott, and tell us a little bit about what has happened around town, again, referencing the tree power line and tree house damage.
Well, here in South Louisiana, we face usually more water damage than wind damage, and unfortunately, we have more wind damage than water. So we have a lot less flooding in our homes, but on the other hand, we have a lot of trees that are down. Unfortunately, those trees have fallen on the power lines, and we're probably looking at about 90% of our city is out of power. And we're fortunate our electrical companies are working very hard to get it back up, but it's going to be a while.
Yeah, 52% of the parish was without power just a little while ago. What's the timeline on getting these trees off the roadways? Well, you did a lot of that last night once the winds died down, but do you still have issues with roads?
Well, you're correct. We did get on the streets at about 9 o'clock last night when the winds, sustained winds were below 40 miles per hour with our Public Works Division and with tractors, and we cleared pretty much all the streets, taking the trees off of the streets to make it safe for people to pass and for our emergency responders to respond if need be as well. So we're still working on that aspect of things, and we're just waiting on the power companies because they have the specialized training to be able to cut down the trees that are on the lines.
And compare this cleanup to the cleanup of Laura 6 weeks ago.
There's no comparison. We didn't have the wind damage. We didn't have the trees. We had a little bit of water from Laura, but it drained very quickly. So we didn't lose power. We were very, very lucky with Laura.
A big difference here.
Yes.
But no reports of any injuries?
No, we have no hospitalization complaints or emergency calls that we have to make for police or fire. So we're very blessed on that part.
Okay, Chief Leger, thanks for joining us. Thanks for the update. Glad everybody's okay. Get the trees cleaned up, and we'll be back to some fine Louisiana living down here.
We're ready for festival season.
There you go. Okay. Thanks, Chief. Once again, the sun is out, Dr. Postel. The dew points come down a little bit, and the winds right now are west and northwest at about 10 miles an hour. A complete reversal of last night after landfall. And then after the rain ended, that's when we had the 75-mile-an-hour gust.
Well, Mike, thank you very much. I want to keep an eye on some of the thunderstorms that are now moving across the south, and it is very possible that we will see a tornado watch issued in the next hour or two, which would include very likely the Atlanta metro area and everywhere south and west of there to the I-10 corridor in Florida. Stay tuned for all the latest on our coverage of Delta when we return.
What does get your daily dose of everything weather?
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
Well, now that Delta has made landfall, organizations across Louisiana are mobilizing to help people recover. That includes the American Red Cross. Joining us now is a spokesperson for the Advanced Public Affairs team, Matthew Teeter. Matthew, thanks so much for joining us this morning. So I want to start with the biggest need that's keeping you all busy right now.
Sure. So, this has just been a tragic event, the same path nearly that Hurricane Laura took Hurricane Delta has now devastated this area again. So what we're focused on right now is to provide those individuals who've evacuated immediate shelter, food, support, and comfort. And that is our focus at this time. We had about 1,000 evacuees stay with us last night in both government-operated and Red Cross-supported shelters. This is in addition to the thousands of people who remain displaced from Hurricane Laura. So our focus right now is to make sure that those folks have the shelter and support that they need.
And as you mentioned, the same area has been slammed by two storms, kind of back to back. So the biggest concern for those people in those areas affected right now would be what?
Sure. So, because Hurricane Laura came through a slightly more powerful storm, really destroyed and had some major damage to homes. Many of those homes have blue doors and certainly could not sustain another hurricane. So there are many people who are displaced that maybe wouldn't have been displaced by this storm. So we have a greater number of people who are in need of shelter.
So could you tell us a little bit about what the Red Cross is doing to support the recovery?
Sure. So we have over 800 disaster responders assigned to this job, with more on the way. Of course, we already had an operation in place. We were still helping those affected by Hurricane Laura. So we will remain here on the ground. I am so proud of our workforce, not only here in Louisiana, but across the country, where we are operating multiple disaster operations. We've had over 1 million shelter stays in the United States just this year. That shattered the record of 2017. And so our primary objective is to ensure that those evacuees have a safe place to stay and all the support that they need, and also keeping in mind on the morale and strength of our workforce.
Oh, yeah, I think that's one of the tough things so much when you have the same area that's kind of been hit over and over again. So you're there, you're on the ground. Can you tell us the one thing that you want people to know as they move forward after Delta? How can they help? What can they do?
Sure. So the thing that we need the most right now is financial support. We are fueled by the generosity of the American people. We need everyone to step up at this time. You can text Red Cross to 90999 to make an instant $10 donation, or you can visit redcross.org to find other ways to support our mission. We also are in need of more volunteers and more people to step up and help us out during this time of need.
Matthew, thanks so much for being with us this morning, and thanks for what you're doing. Matthew Teeter with the Advanced Public Affairs team for the American Red Cross. And again, thanks so much for joining us. Dr. Postel, it's that storm fatigue that so many people are suffering at this point, and we're still not done with Delta.
No, we're not. We have a couple of things to watch. We still have sort of a part of the storm that is bringing some very gusty winds, not a whole lot of rain necessarily, but definitely the kind of wind that can still knock down some trees and take down some power lines across parts of Mississippi. That's one part of the storm. And then there's another one that's developing out in here where we've got a tornado risk that is beginning to ramp up a little bit. Let's go one by one. Let's take a look at this part of the storm where we're still dealing with some gusty winds here and there. Now, these selected observations don't really tell the whole story, of course, but we are gusting between 30 and 40 in many locations in Mississippi still, and in parts of, let's even say, northeastern Louisiana. Again, lots of reports of trees and power lines down all morning long. and probably still some wind gusts over 50 miles per hour in places. But the other part of the storm minutes or so. But farther to the north and east, we got to pay close attention to this region of Georgia and eastern Alabama as that line kind of slowly marches its way through. A tornado watch probably will be issued, 60% chance of that, according to the Storm Prediction Center. So we'll be monitoring the conditions going forward. But one of the drivers behind all of that is the strong wind shear. Low-level winds are coming out of the southeast. Just above the surface, they're coming out of the south and southwest at a much stronger speed. So there's a lot of sort of what's called crossover between what the wind is doing low down and what the wind is doing high up. That's wind shear. That kind of wind profile can support rotating thunderstorms, supercells, and even tornadoes. Limited instability, this is one of the limiting factors, but I can tell you what, it's getting a little bit more unstable in this part of Georgia and Alabama. So we've got to watch very carefully over the next few hours these kinds of developments, because I do believe we will see probably a tornado watch come out and those conditions become more favorable for severe weather and tornadoes in Georgia, including the Atlanta metro area and in parts of Alabama. Stay tuned. Coming up, we'll have much more on Delta and continuing coverage of its aftermath.
Welcome back to Weekend Recharge. I'm meteorologist Paul Goodell live in Jennings, Louisiana, and we took a long hit last night with that northern eye wall of Hurricane Delta. You see some of the damage here of trees down, not just a couple of saplings. These are pretty big pine trees, which were covering both roads here, in fact, blocking in these residents for hours this morning till the road crews came on through. In fact, one of the trees was actually across towards this elementary school and hanging on some of those power lines. We saw a power crew that came out and they made sure the lines were not energized, and they have a great system of even so, without the power through them, they made sure they were grounded, and then they cut the tree down. And see one little branch still left hanging on the line, and now the line is safe enough to perhaps try to restore power as well. And we also, at our hotel, we lost power for a little while last night, but we also had water coming into the front door. Now, yes, we had a lot of rain. Some areas here, 6 to almost 12 inches of rain last night, but it was the wind, the same wind that blew down these trees. Well, it's also because of the heavy rain, which has kind of saturated the ground. You can still see water standing there where these root balls are exposed. But the winds last night, 70, 80 mile per hour winds strong enough to blow these down, aided with the saturated ground, but it was the wind alone with that heavy rain which caused a lot of flooding. So while a lot of these homes fortunately don't have trees on top of them, there's a good chance they have rain and water inside them. Why? Because you have persistent and sustained winds in tropical storm force. You have gusts 70, 80 plus miles per hour. That physically takes that rainwater and blows it into what you would think is a pretty well-sealed door or around a window. So that's what we had at our hotel. We had the wind pushing the water inside the hotel. So some of the water damage here isn't because, you know, the water just rose or storm surge. It was the wind taking that water. And trust me, you can ask any of us who are out here standing in the hurricane or even tropical storms. That wind finds a way, even in waterproof jackets, to find a way to push that water inside you. So the power of the wind clearly evident here, but surprisingly in other places that, you know, other homes here and businesses that have water damage. They're thinking, how could this water get in here? It got in there because of the strong winds we had with Delta. They're gone right now, but the damage is still evident. In fact, the damage also evident east of here into Scott, Louisiana, and that's where meteorologist Mike Seidel is. Hey, Mike.
I'm ready. No.
Okay, maybe Mike's ready. You hear me, Mike? Okay, we lost Mike, but that's technology out here. Again, the power line's down, so the cell service. We communicate that way, and that's just live TV for you. But right now, we do know we do have Felicia back in the studio. Hey, Felicia.
Yeah, just hanging out, and that is right, live TV. So let's talk about what is going on, your latest information on Delta. We do have some rain across the mid-Atlantic. That's what you're looking at right now. You can see from Knoxville stretching up into Richmond, Roanoke, all of that a bit wet this morning, but also pretty soggy from this rain band that really hasn't moved a whole lot from Huntsville all the way down through Pensacola. It has been a very wet morning there. You've got the center of circulation. You can make it out here, and that is kind of rotating around that rain band, rotating around all of that moisture for places like Memphis, Tupelo, Little Rock. You're just on the very outskirts of that. So we do have a flash flood watch. I've kind of watched this being chipped away over the past several hours, but we still have that hanging out across portions of Arkansas, northern Mississippi, portions of Tennessee there as well. Let's take a look at what you can expect for the rain still to come. 3 to 5 inches possible for some of the higher elevations of the Appalachians, generally about up to an inch, but a lot of this would be falling on already saturated ground, on rivers and creeks that are already swollen, so there's just nowhere for this rain and water to go. By tomorrow, you can see that rain continuing to stretch through the mid-Atlantic and up into the northeast. We're getting it in Pennsylvania. We're getting it in Virginia. The Carolinas going to be stuck in it as well. So where we were seeing some of those higher totals possible, you see it represented here. Places like Asheville, you guys have that risk for some flash flooding as we head into early next week. Here's what it's looking like for Monday. Rain returning to places like New England, New York City. You're getting in on that. Some scattered showers and storms here or there. And that could once again also lead to some flash flooding. Still a bit behind for rainfall for portions of New England. So you guys could use the rain. You just don't want it all at one time. Well, that is what we're taking a look at for the next couple days. Make sure you stick around with the Weather Channel for continuing coverage of Delta. We'll be with you until 9 p.m. Eastern tonight.
A woman.
And you are looking at the sights and sounds of what was a traumatic night here across Louisiana. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, the day after landfall. And we are live here in Pecan Island, right at the Gulf of Mexico, about 20 miles from where Delta made landfall in Creole, Louisiana. We got crews, though, all across the state. You got meteorologist Paul Goodloe. He is live for us in Jennings, Louisiana, and also meteorologist Mike Seidel outside of Lafayette in Scott, Louisiana. Continuing round-the-clock coverage right here on the Weather Channel. Of course, monitoring the latest as the storm continues to push inland, but also the aftermath, the impacts that we have seen here at the coast. It really is a very different storm than what we saw with Laura, so we don't want to compare the two at all. A lot of the people, though, they went through both storms, so they have comparisons on the differences between the two. And from the people that we have talked to here in Pecan Island, they say the winds were much stronger here, okay, here with Delta than what we had with Laura. However, the surge was not nearly as high. I want to show you the Gulf of Mexico. That's about 3.5 miles off behind me. So this is due south, okay? So we're essentially as far south as you can get. There's one road in, one road out, and the water's still high. This is the remnants of the surge that came up. It's slowly receding because we've been here for a few hours, and the water was actually covering the road. In fact, Ben, if we can pan over this direction, I'll show you the road. This is the one road in and out of town. It actually connects. If we were to go over, you would get over to Creole and then eventually Cameron, Louisiana, about 20 miles off the way. This is the one road in and out of these communities here, right on the water's edge. And you can see how much grass got taken up and covered the road in numerous properties. So the locals have been out all morning. We actually have some drone footage. I want to show you kind of the comparison. We took the drone footage about 2 hours ago, and the road was still blocked at that time, but locals have been out and about all morning. Residents and just everyone kind of pitching in on whatever tools they got to kind of get the roads cleared up from the debris. And essentially it's that cane grass that gets washed up and taken out. And it really is amazing to see the force of the surge. Even though it wasn't as high as what we saw with Laura, it was still devastating. And some of the worst damage that we have seen has been right on within 5 or 10 miles of the coast. In Lafayette, it's a very different story. Power outages are really the biggest issue. Structural damage has been minimal. We haven't seen a lot aside from cosmetic damage. You have the wind damage. But really quickly, Carl, before we go back to you, typically what you would see out here is a lot of marsh, a lot of grasses. So the surge, and this is what happens when you get hit. We've been hit 4 times now in Louisiana with direct landfalls of tropical systems this season alone. The more hurricanes it really eats away at that environment. And now you're left with what looks to be the Gulf of Mexico. But the Gulf is still 3.5 miles away, and this essentially should be a grassy marsh. But the grasses literally get uprooted and then washed inland for many miles along with so much other debris.
Wow, just amazing to see the power of water there, Chris. Thank you so much. And let's take a look at the latest on the storm right now. It is now a tropical depression and centered over Mississippi and moving northeast at 16 miles per hour. There's the forecast track, and we do expect to see an ongoing rain threat and a severe weather threat as well. You notice the center of circulation there and that arm that is well out to the east. We're still getting some pretty gusty wind in parts of Mississippi, now gusting up to 30 plus miles per hour in some locations. And also you have this area of storms that is now in central parts of Alabama. There is a tornado watch in effect in Florida and southern Alabama, but there's an area that the Storm Prediction Center is watching for a possible tornado watch. They're giving it a 60% chance. That would extend from Atlanta down into Columbus and almost to Montgomery there and down into North Florida as well. What we are seeing today is a lot of wind shear, winds coming out of different directions at different altitudes. You see how the winds are coming out of the east or southeast at the surface in orange, and then coming out of the south. And those are winds of 40 miles per hour at about 5,000 feet up. So that turning of the wind creates a spin in the atmosphere, and that's the beginning of the process that leads to rotation in thunderstorms when you have that vorticity in the atmosphere. Now, one thing we're not seeing as much of is instability. That is warm and humid air that is fuel for thunderstorms. It is limited, but it will be enough to give us some brief pop-up thunderstorms and some brief spin-ups. And so there is a 3 out of 10 on the Torcon today from Atlanta and on down into eastern Alabama. And as we look at the model forecast, you see these individual cells that are popping up there in West Georgia and Alabama late this afternoon. So certainly we'll need to keep our eyes on those. Then a little bit of activity into tonight, but watch this tomorrow morning. We see some supercells there in eastern parts of Georgia. So the story is not going to be over tomorrow. We may see even more severe weather in parts of Georgia and the Carolinas. Well, Weather Channel meteorologist Mike Seidel is in the town of Scott, just to the west of Lafayette. And Mike, we've heard that there have been a couple of waves of wind with the storm, one coming in with the eye wall itself, but then even on the underside where there was not much weather, there was a very strong wind. And I'm wondering if that matches up with your experience there.
Yeah, exactly, Carl. It was really amazing. This is not your typical landfall. As Dr. Postel mentioned earlier, you get into the fall and you often see this. We had most of the rain between about 2 and 7 p.m. We had 3.5 inches. And then the winds, the strongest winds occurred after the rain stopped. We had a hurricane force wind gust clocked at 75. That was at 8:04 at the airport in Lafayette, and that was about 45 minutes after the rain ended. And then it just rocked and rolled for several hours. And a couple of nice friends we met here. This is Robert and Susan James. They own the house here. The tree fell on their cars in the house, but you weren't home. Tell us a little bit about what happened last night in your lives.
Well, just a little bit displaced. We went to a family, a little bit more of a sturdier place to be, because, you know, when the Weather Channel says don't stay in a mobile home, you don't stay in a mobile home, and this is exactly the result, you know. Just anything can happen, you know. It's weather, and you can't never mistake it for a moment. The weather seemingly was not anything as bad as what we were thinking earlier on, but as the rain passed, as you said, when the rain passed and the on our brand new roof, it's basically only about 8 or 9 months old from a previous storm. It did a little bit of damage, but you know, we're still standing above ground.
What about your classic Lincolns back here? Tell us a little bit about how they survived or didn't.
It doesn't look like they survived very well, but I mean, these cars here I've had for quite some time. I restored them. I had them fully restored, and actually, it's probably the only thing that saved the house. If if it hadn't, I think the tree actually fell, just kind of feathered down, and the car supported it. But they took the brunt of the actual tree falling. But I think that they actually saved us. But that's material things, you know.
Right.
We're very resilient down here. We just that can all be replaced. That can all be fixed. You know, I mean, it may not be original, but you know, it's still a classic. And anyway, it's just something that I hobby with, you know. But all in all, it's just we're grateful to be standing above ground. You know, the family's all good. Lots of friends and family that come in to help. You know, this community here and anywhere down south, you find the same thing. All we do is work hard and eat a lot. You know, that's what we do. We're all about food down here. I'm sure you know.
Food down here is good.
But that's the basic thing. You know, everyone is ready and willing to come out here and help. And that's the fortunate thing about being down south. People are very friendly.
Yeah, we appreciate your time. Thanks for the
and we appreciate
your story.
Y'all. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, and I'm glad you heeded that advice. Get out of the mobile home. Let's go to Paul Goodloe, about 35 miles to our west towards Lake Charles in Jennings, Louisiana. And Paul, I could hear the sound of chainsaws this morning, which is often the sound you hear following hurricanes and tornadoes.
Chainsaws, heavy equipment, and that's because we got a lot of cleanup to do. Even behind me, you can see telephone poles still down here, so a lot of trees down as well. It might be a while before that one's taken up because they got to make sure the lines aren't done. And also, this is kind of a secondary street. You might hear the beeping of this front-end loader here. It's a Kubota. You got Kubotas, you got Caterpillars, you got John Deeres. You name a heavy piece of equipment that can lift things like that huge log. That's from a tree that was blocking this road maybe about an hour or so ago before the Public Works came through with their chainsaws and their front loaders to cut it up just to get it off the road. Now they're trying to pile it up to have it removed, but right now the important thing was to clear the road so you can start at least having some of these people who live in these homes here an able access point to get out of here and onto the main thoroughfare. So this is going to continue because we've seen a lot of trees. In fact, if we pan over to the right, you can see other trees which are still down here, and we even have a tree that was on some power lines there right next to the elementary school. People are still out here working hard, trying to do their best to clean up from yet another storm that came through here. Again, this is now the fourth named system just so far this hurricane season, which has made landfall here in the state of Louisiana. It has been, yes, a busy year, and we haven't done it with it yet, so we don't know about how many records we're going to set here. But Delta, the fourth letter in the Greek alphabet. It's now our 26th named storm so far this season. It is our 9th hurricane, and it's our 3rd major hurricane. Fortunately, it didn't make landfall as a major hurricane. It weakened somewhat. It was a 100-mile-per-hour hurricane, Category 2, when it made landfall. But even Category 2s can do quite a bit of damage. Even here in Jennings, we had hours of 60-plus mile-per-hour wind gusts. We had a couple hours of 80-plus mile-per-hour wind gusts here, so it definitely did a beating on this town. And this town also took a beating with Hurricane Laura, but Delta was a little closer, and winds are even stronger. And yeah, we're cleaning up once again here in southwestern Louisiana. Back to you.
Yeah, Paul, no rest for the weary there. Good to see they're out getting the job done. That's Paul Goodlow for us. And let's take a look here at the situation as the storm approached. Winds gusted to 96 miles per hour in Lake Charles last night as Delta came on shore, taking out potentially thousands of trees and power poles. At this hour, more than 500,000 customers without power in the state of Louisiana alone. And people who stayed in Lake Charles describe what it was like as the second hurricane in just 6 weeks moved in.
The winds were a lot stronger, and it lasted a lot longer than I was anticipating. So just having that wind forcing the water in through all the cracks of the house, through the windows, was pretty intense. And then the rocking of the house, I wasn't expecting that. It felt kind of like a rolling earthquake, and it lasted, I want to say, hours, and I was expecting it to be maybe a short 2 to 3 hour period. It was like 4 to 6 hours.
Long time. Right now, along the coast, storm surge there was intense. This was the scene last night in Crier-Mort Point, Louisiana. Some gauges in coastal Louisiana reporting storm surge numbers of more than 8 feet as the worst of the storm came in. And due to the extensive damage in Lafayette area, the local utility Slemco says it could take days before power is restored. There's also widespread road closures across southern Louisiana parishes, and Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards is scheduled to tour the damage this afternoon. So we take a look here at what we can expect throughout the rest of today into tomorrow when it comes to Delta. Right now, a 35-mile-per-hour storm. It is a tropical depression at this point, pretty ragged looking as it continues to push inland here, bringing some rain to Mississippi and into Tennessee. Still have a wind advisory up here in purple. That does include you here in Memphis, back down throughout much of Mississippi. Jackson, also quite windy and gusty out there today. And we look at the current winds. We're still gusting up in the 20s here in Memphis and Little Rock as well. Monroe, Louisiana, also in Jackson, gusting near 30 miles per hour at the moment. So still very gusty, breezy afternoon out there. And some of those sustained winds are in the teens as well. So it's not just an occasional gust. It's kind of a steady wind out there for many of you. Here's a look at what we're expecting, though. The storm continuing to push off to the north-northeast throughout the rest of today and in through tomorrow morning. By tomorrow morning, expecting to feel some of those impacts in cities like Nashville. All of this coming your way eventually into Kentucky and beyond. So we'll continue on that northeasterly push, but really just spreading a lot of that moisture with it. So rain, thunderstorms, maybe even severe weather, not out of the question throughout the rest of the day here throughout the southeast and into the mid-south, certainly even eventually in through the mid-Atlantic. We're going to be looking at that rain arriving tomorrow, along with some of those perhaps stronger storms, and really stretching all the way, as I mentioned, into eventually the northeast. This is going to be by the time we get into the first part of next week. So this combining with some moisture and some fronts that are already in place here in the northeast. So it's going to make for a mess of things, I think, over the next couple of days. Memphis already raining where you are right now, at least a light rain, looking at that continuing at least throughout the remainder of tonight. But we want to get back out now to Chris Bruin. He is going to talk about what the situation is there in Louisiana.
Hey, Julie. Yes, we're in Pecan Island, a little over an hour outside of Lafayette, right at the coast. So you'll wonder what Louisiana looks like between I-10 and the Gulf of Mexico. This is what it looks like, and this is why we're so vulnerable to storm surge. We can show you the remaining surge as it slowly now starts to drain back out to the ocean water, but the damage is already done. You've got a lot of power lines down. Of course, no one has power here in this community, and roads are still difficult to get around. Residents are trying to clear a path through them, but the water washed all that marsh grass over with. We're going to show you more of what the coast looks like after Delta's wrath next.
Introducing a revolution in the world of pain relief. New Advil Dual Action. Advil targets pain at the source. Acetaminophen blocks pain signals. New Advil Dual Action with acetaminophen.
This is Fracture. Just upload an image, place your order, and it'll show up at your door beautifully printed directly on glass. And this isn't just another frame, not just another canvas. This is new. This is a Fracture. Visit FractureMe.com and print one today.
Phil Swift here for Flex Paste, the incredible rubberized paste. Right out of the tub, it clings to the surface, and it instantly fills gaps and holes. FlexPaste dries to a strong, flexible rubber, perfect for sealing RVs and campers. Use it to help prevent flood damage, stop rodents from getting in your home, or even crafts and hobbies. Get FlexPaste and the FlexSeal family of products at FlexSealProducts.com.
These are both satisfying snacks. At 30 calories, V8 is surprisingly filling. You can have yogurt for 30 calories too, but the portion might be a little less satisfying. V8, the original plant-powered drink. Veg up.
Our focus is raising the girls.
Being able to order stuff online,
it helps out a lot.
We get to use that time that we would be at the grocery store. That time is priceless.
New to the breakfast battle, Chocolatey Life cereal. 24 grams of whole grains and
Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we. Get the information you need to stay safe every day, right here on the Weather Channel.
Okay, I want to show you some of the aftermath here of Lake Charles. You're looking at a bird's eye view. Remember the blue tarps? And of course, blue tarps cannot withstand the force of a hurricane. They just can't. They're not made for that. So it's really hard when this same area that was devastated by a hurricane gets hit by another hurricane, even a tropical storm. When you have winds over 50, 60 miles per hour, those tarps are no match. And you can see them kind of now completely ripped off of some of the homes, exposing the infrastructure of the attic and the beams. And of course, it was raining during the hurricane, so you got water coming back in. And some of these homes, you got to imagine, they were just fixed up from the water damage that we had from Laura, and now they got to do it all over again. And that's, I think, just heartbreaking to wrench through. Really, really heartbreaking. We know the surge was a factor, not as high as what we saw with Hurricane Laura, but also, too, Delta not as strong of a storm. But still, we want to show you some of the surge after effects. The surge is going down, but what we got here, even 3 hours ago, the water was completely covering the road. Everything you see that's kind of matted down with grass, that was all brought up from the surge, and that was completely covered in water. The standing water still kind of stuck in some of the low-lying spots, and notice how all that grass just got ripped right out of the marsh, just beyond the roadway, and then got washed up. Even the porch in front of the old school that we're at here, still seeing water underneath. And the amazing thing is these oaks, these huge oaks, we have them all over Louisiana, Carl. And they are able to withstand the force of some of these hurricanes. We saw it in Lake Charles with Laura, and we're still seeing it again. And how many storms do you have to go through to see, downed oaks? They're really rare. And so, Carl, that's at least some good news, but we know power lines, just those branches that come down, they take out a lot of power, and that's what we're dealing with cities in Lafayette and also Lake Charles.
Yeah, and that intertidal area, very good at sort of dampening that surge as it moves in. Chris, thank you so much. And let's take a look at what's going on with the storm right now. And we're watching the center of circulation now in western Mississippi, and then this big arm of rain and some embedded thunderstorms within that in Alabama. That is an area where we're going to be concerned about strong wind, gusty wind, and also potentially some tornadoes. You notice the winds right now are gusting up to nearly 30 miles per hour in Jackson, so it's going to be gustier over the next few hours here, and some heavier rain coming up through northern Mississippi and into the Memphis area. Then farther east, this is the area of storms that we are now watching for possible tornadoes. There is a tornado watch in effect in southern Alabama, northwest Florida, going until 1 o'clock. But the Storm Prediction Center is looking at the potential for a tornado watch into eastern Alabama and also into Georgia, including the Atlanta metro area. So they're giving that a 60% chance of being issued here. That may come out within the next couple of hours if it does. So 3 out of 10 on the Torcon in western Georgia as well as into eastern parts of Alabama. And we're thinking that that severe weather threat is going to continue into this evening. Here you see the model forecast. Notice the individual cells across Georgia and Alabama. Any of those could be capable of producing tornadoes. And then we'll see even more of that into tomorrow morning. There's 10 o'clock tonight. And then tomorrow morning, some stronger storms developing in East Georgia. So that severe threat is not going to be over by the morning. In fact, will continue into the day tomorrow in parts of South Carolina. There you see the area of concern starting in the morning in East Georgia, coming across South Carolina into the afternoon and even into North Carolina as well. All right, I want to go out to Paul Goodlow right now. He's been in Jennings. And Paul, if you could you just kind of walk us through your experience when it started to get really bad and how long that continued?
Carl, I'd probably say around, 3, 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. It's been raining all afternoon long. It started raining yesterday morning, but around 3 or 4, the wind started getting stronger and stronger, and then they really picked up. We had landfall about, 60 miles southwest of us about 6 o'clock, but then we get into the eye wall, 7, 8, 9 o'clock. I mean, it was just howling out here. That's when some of the strongest winds came in. Then went through the eye. Wind shifted and still gusty winds after that. And we're here now surveying some of the damage. And this one tree, which has been cut in a couple of pieces, I even grabbed part of the top part. You can see all the rings on this tree. And this is from a taller section of this same tree. And just the rings I counted in this section, at least 60, 65 rings here, if not older. So this tree is easily, maybe an easy guess, 80 plus years old. Granted, it's a pine tree, so it's softer wood. Chris was talking about those oaks that came down. That's a hardy wood, but look at the root structure here. I mentioned the rain, which started yesterday morning. It saturated the ground. The ground is soft. I get closer to the root structure, it's almost like a waterbed. That's how soft the ground is here. I won't get too close. I don't want to fall in there. But all the rain we had saturated the ground, and the strong winds came through. That was the knockout punch. Even tall trees like this can't handle that type of strong winds for hours upon hours. We're talking probably 6 to 10 hours of 50-plus mile-per-hour wind gusts. Good news is we're done with it now, but the bad news is the cleanup continues. More coming up after this.
New to the breakfast battle.
What a wild 24 hours we have had here across southern Louisiana, from Lake Charles to Cameron, right up back into Lafayette, Louisiana, and down towards Pecan Island and areas around New Iberia, where hurricane force gusts were relentless for several hours last night. You can see some of the wave action we had outside of some of the resort areas there in Lake Charles, of course, devastated by Laura a little over a month ago. And then Cameron, Louisiana, that's where Laura made landfall, again dealing with round number 2. Really crazy to see a landfall so close with very powerful storms. We're here in Pecan Island. So Cameron, Louisiana is a little over a 40-minute drive to our west down this road right here, which essentially got washed out by surge. It's no surprise given how close we are to the water, but essentially what you're looking at is not the Gulf of Mexico. However, the waters did rise up from the Gulf. So that's all saltwater inundation and the remaining surge as it starts to go out, but it brought in so much grass. And one thing I am noticing, notice behind this house, smack dab in the middle of the trees, you have what appears to be a roof of a shed, a mixture of a lot of different buildings kind of collided together. And the thing that's difficult is that damage from Laura, or was that damage from Delta? We talked to one of the locals here, Carl, and they did say they had a lot of this pretty much cleaned up after Laura came through. So any new debris, for the most part, was from Delta. But again, especially in Lake Charles, it's going to be hard to define what's actually new damage compared to all the damage that's still trying to be repaired.
And Chris, really nice vantage point there to see all of that remaining surge. Where are you? Are you standing on top of a house, or?
So there is an old school that has become a hunting camp. And so we are on the top of the roof. It's a flat balcony type vibe going on, but it gives you a good vantage point almost 3 stories above the tree line, and you can really see out for miles. So if we were to go due south, Carl, just for perspective, we're in Pecan Island. The Gulf of Mexico is about 3.5 miles to our south. That's where the water starts. And then this is all just marshland, which should be filled with grasses, but after each hurricane's hit, a lot of that gets destroyed and washed up by the surge.
Yeah, it's amazing how that coastline becomes erased for a short time there when you get a surge like that. Chris, thank you so much. And let's take a look back and show you what this storm did. It made landfall last night at 6 p.m. near Creole, that is to the west of Pecan Island. Category 2 intensity winds of 100 miles per hour, and the pressure was at 970 millibars. That was the 4th landfall in Louisiana, and the only other time in the record books we've had 4 landfalls was 2002. So that is tied for the most landfalls in any season there in Louisiana. There are several seasons with 3 landfalls. And, you know, for the most part, the winds were strong tropical storm force in terms of sustained winds, but there was very, very strong wind aloft. We were seeing what is called a decoupling, where you've got really strong wind aloft, but not so much at the surface. But where you get stronger thunderstorms, it can transport that down. And so that's how we got these wind gusts that were well over hurricane force and gusting to 96 in Lake Charles and 81 in Jennings. So very impressive storm in terms of some of those peak gusts, and also a significant surge as well. You see the 8.3 foot reading, freshwater canal locks. That is near Pecan Island there and just to the west of Vermilion Bay. So right now it is a tropical depression and moving up through parts of Mississippi. And along with this storm, we expect to see a severe weather threat and some heavy rain threat as well. We're going to talk more about that coming up. But we want to get out to Mike Seidel right now. He is in Scott, just to the west of Lafayette. And Mike, a pretty powerful storm, even though it was weakening at landfall, it certainly did pack a punch.
It did, especially after the rain ended. Here in Scott, we gusted nearby Lafayette Airport, 75 miles an hour. That was 8:04. The rain had ended about 45 minutes before, so the winds just came right on down and took down this hackberry tree over the James cars. These are classic cars. This is a 77 Lincoln Cartier. We got some Lincolns, a Monte Carlo. House is okay, they're okay. They just put on this new roof back in November following a thunderstorm, and it's just barely a scratch. So we're happy to see that everybody's fine. But about 90% of Scott is without power. At one point, nearly 600,000 customers here in the state of Louisiana in the dark. The power is slowly coming on. We'll go back to Chris Bruin down at Pecan Island. Stay with us here on the Weather Channel.
Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards will be touring the damage caused by Hurricane Delta today. Right now, he's briefing the media in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Let's listen in.
Good afternoon, and we're about to head out to southwest Louisiana to survey the damage from Hurricane Delta. But before I left, I did want to give you a brief statement, an overview of what we know. First of all, Hurricane Delta, as forecasted, made landfall at about 6 p.m. last night near Creole, Louisiana in Cameron Parish, only about 12 miles east of where Hurricane Laura made landfall. It did make landfall as a Category 2, and the forecast appears to have been quite accurate as it relates to the surge, the wind, and the rain. The highest rainfall totals were in Lake Charles with over 15 inches over the past 48 hours. Additionally, the Baton Rouge area received over 10 inches of rain in the same time. So obviously this was a very big storm. Even if it wasn't quite as powerful as Hurricane Laura, it was much bigger. While the impacts were evident across a large portion of the state, it's obvious that the hardest hit areas appear to be southwest Louisiana and Cameron, Calcasieu, Jeff Davis, Allen, Vermilion, and Acadia parishes. So obviously this was a very serious, very large, and powerful storm that produced significant amounts of damage. And before we get there, we already know that there will be damage in southwest Louisiana that will be very difficult to differentiate between what was caused by Hurricane Laura and what was caused by Hurricane Delta. But what we know is that tens of thousands of Louisianans, as we speak, are in a very difficult situation. And we're going to do everything we can, working with our federal and local partners, to make sure that we're addressing their needs just as soon as we possibly can. To that end, the National Guard has more than 3,000 National Guardsmen activated in support of emergency operations. They are already moving commodities to set up points of distribution. They're engaging in route clearance and engineering operations, security, both in terms of our fixed facilities like shelters, but also security in assisting law enforcement, particularly in Calcasieu Parish. They're also running generator missions, and they provided LNOs. And as of this morning, they have 1.5 million meals that they can distribute, 1.5 million bottles of water, about 32,000 tarps, and 48,000 bags of ice. They're currently conducting search and rescue sweeps with 16 aircraft in southwest Louisiana as well. The National Guard has rescued about 10 individuals in Rapides Parish. About 80 individuals across the state have received assistance with rescue, evacuation, or relocation due to urban search and rescue teams. Primarily those are the Fire Marshal's Office, but we have teams that came in from other states as well, and some teams that came in from FEMA. The CPRA is reporting that all measures that were put in place.
Governor John Bel Edwards of Louisiana, again talking about Hurricane Delta, the hardest hit areas being southwest Louisiana. He says 3,000 National Guards, men and women, are on the ground. They do have 1.5 million meals and water to distribute, and they are currently conducting search and rescue efforts. So a lot of hard work ongoing there.
Looking at a lot of damage here, and it's amazing, some of the beautiful trees here, what's on them. This is called resurrection fern, and when it rains, this thing really kind of comes alive, and it's kind of all ringing here on the limbs of this beautiful oak tree here. We have some smaller limbs which have broken off from this oak tree, but yeah, oak is a much harder wood here, so it takes a lot to bring that down. Plus, they have much deeper roots compared to some of these other trees that, in fact, just in the foreground there. That's a pine tree, so it's much softer wood, shallower roots, and that was also a victim of some of the winds we had last night when the eye wall came through here. We're talking 60, 70, 80+ mile per hour wind gust. You can still smell the smell of timber, of like a chainsaw coming through, or even a wood mill here. You can smell it because of the broken trees here and the sap still in the air. You can see this is a pine tree. This is not from this side of the street. This is from that side of the street. You can see the root balls and these trees which were knocked over, and they had the public works crews here in the city of Jennings. They were out here with a front end loader and a chainsaw cutting this up just so that we can have traffic now come through this road, because this road was blocked off, as well as Shanklin Avenue, because there was a pretty large tree that was over the road here and hanging on the power lines there. First, the power crew had to come through and ground the lines, make sure they were out, and then they cut that tree down. Now they're just going to clear the roads. This continues to be an ongoing effort. And this area also hit pretty hard, more trees down, 6 weeks ago when Hurricane Laura slammed a little farther west of here. Again, we're about 45 miles east of Lake Charles. Lake Charles got hit hard with Category 4 Laura. Fortunately, Delta was only a Category 2. Still brought substantial damage to the area with a much closer pass. But cleanup continues here, as yet the fourth named system has made landfall here in the state of Louisiana as we still round out this season of 2020.
almost unbelievable. This is real.
When your cameras roll, our experts react.
Jaw-dropping.
Weather Gone Viral, tomorrow night at 9, here on the Weather Channel.
Welcome back to our coverage of what is now Tropical Depression Delta, and we are looking at an ongoing severe threat, and there is a brand new tornado watch issued by the Storm Prediction Center, that covering much of eastern Alabama along the I-20 and 85 corridors down towards Montgomery, southeast part of the state as well, and then also into North Georgia, including much of the Atlanta metro area, especially on the west side of the metro along I-20 and 85. This is going until 8 p.m. tonight. We're not seeing a lot of activity right now in North Georgia, just a couple of spotty showers and a big mass of rain off to the west. But we are looking at a more active line in southern Alabama, and in particular, a bunch of individual discrete cells that are popping up out ahead of that line, and those are the ones you really want to pay attention to. Those may get a little bit more interesting here over the next couple of hours, and we certainly will keep our eyes on that. Well, we want to go out to Chris Bruin. He's been reporting to us from Pecan Island in Louisiana. And Chris, it's amazing how when you get a surge like that, it's not something that comes in with the storm and then recedes immediately after the storm goes by. It's still largely there.
Yeah, you know, when we got here, Carl, this was all covered in water. Now you've got the grass that's been all just mangled and matted down together, and the water's slowly starting to recede back out to the marshes and the tidal basins and the swamps. But it's a slow process. I mean, we're nearing, 18 hours after landfall, and we still got surge flooding here in some of the very vulnerable low-lying areas, and even in the ditches you still got that saltwater intrusion. We talked to David Johns. He's the owner of this old school that's become a camp for hunters and fishermen and duck hunters, and obviously he does not ride out storms here on Pecan Island just because of how dangerous it is. He rode it out in Lafayette, but he's had to prepare for his fair share of storms, especially this year. Here's what he had to say.
It's been interesting. A lot of nerve-wracking times. It's been where we would prepare, and it would get detoured around, or it would go off somewhere else. Like saying, a lot of times we get built up for them and then they don't hit. Well, we had 2 of them that hit this year, so.
Yeah, so always better be prepared than unprepared. And no matter how many times we have to go through this, if you live in hurricane country, you know there will be years you're going to have to deal with this multiple times in a season. Hopefully, Mike, this will be the last one. But even in Lafayette, you're not far. You're in Scott, Louisiana. I mean, what was your experience like there? From the people that we talked to, especially in Lafayette, they said the winds were so much worse with Delta than what they experienced in Lafayette with Laura.
They were. It was like a flip-flop. During Laura, they had 8 or 9 inches of rain. This time they had about 3.5, still a daily record. But the peak wind gust this time was 75 at the airport. And the difference, too, is the winds lasted longer. And they also came in after the rain ended. We've been talking about that all morning with Dr. Postel and Carl, that we got the strongest wind gust after the rain ended in this part of Louisiana. With that said, we've seen some improvement in that power getting back on. This morning I checked power outages in Louisiana about 8 o'clock, 580,000. Now it's down to 520,000. So they've gotten about 10% of the power back on in about the past 4 hours. So they're making inroads. The winds have died down quite a bit, so you can get those bucket trucks up. But it's all about trees down on power lines. In this case, it's a hackberry tree down on the James home they've been in for 30 years. They evacuated because, as we tell you, get out of a mobile home. They're okay. The roof is okay. It's a new roof, by the way. It was put on in November, and so the roof's fine. The only real damage, and it can be fixed, these classic cars, a 77 Lincoln Cartier. We've got a couple Lincoln Continentals and a Monte Carlo. So, Julie, they'll have to work on the cars, but the house looks like it's in pretty good shape. They're fine, and thankfully they're slowly getting the power back on across the state of Louisiana. But another tough couple of days for a state now that's had 4 landfalls this season.
Yeah, just unprecedented. All right, Mike, thanks for that report. Well, you know, we also have a cold front triggering some severe storms in the Northeast down in through New England that's going to be lasting in through this afternoon, maybe this evening. So we take a look at the situation here live in Syracuse right now and in Holton, Maine. Quiet there for now, but we do have the wet weather on the way. So we take a look here at the forecast. Some of this moisture is tropical moisture in place here in the mid-Atlantic right now, not necessarily associated with Delta, but we also have this front that's going to be dropping in from Canada. That's going to meet up with some low-level moisture as well, triggering some of those thunderstorms later on today. We're talking about cities like Syracuse all the way over into portions of New England. You'll be seeing some of this active weather here. So here's a look at our red zone, as we call it, stretching all the way up into Caribou, Maine. So pretty widespread area here where we could see some pretty hefty storms develop as we get in through the later parts of this afternoon and in through this evening. We'll keep you posted on any watches or warnings.
And welcome back into the Weather Channel's continuing live coverage now, nearly a day after landfall of Hurricane Delta. We are monitoring the situation and getting a grasp on the damage that has occurred here along the coast and numerous communities around the state of Louisiana. We've got teams spread far and wide. I'm meteorologist Chris Bruin. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We are in Pecan Island, about a little over an hour and a half away from Lafayette, right on the shores of the Gulf of Mexico. We've got meteorologist Paul Goodloe in Jennings, Louisiana, right along I-10. And we also got meteorologist Mike Seidel. He's just outside of Lafayette along I-10 there in Scott, Louisiana. We're going to check back in with everybody and kind of see how each community is faring. What's the damage been like? What's the extent of the power outages? Has power been restored? And again, a lot of recovery. Thankfully, the weather is cooperating nicely for those who don't have power. It is comfortable, dry. We got that, the cold front, which helped bring Delta to the northeast altogether and weaken it before landfall, is also helping us out after the storm and clearing the skies out, drying the air, and keeping the temperatures down, because that's not usually the case when we talk about hurricanes, especially in Louisiana. All right, we're here in Pecan Island, high above the tree line, just to show you a vantage point of what it looks like. I want to show you the surge line. You've got the Gulf of Mexico, which actually is not this water that you're seeing. The Gulf's another 3.5 miles to our south beyond the horizon line, where you have that little darker tint of grasses. That's where the Gulf of Mexico actually lies. Now, the surge came in all that way. No surprise. That's typically what happens in marshland. It comes and goes with the tide. But the surge came all the way up past the road. This is the highway that connects here, Pecan Island, all the way down towards Cameron and Creole, Louisiana, where Delta made landfall, as well as Laura. All right, and the water came all the way into these homes and then kind of stopped there. But the surge was higher here in Pecan Island with Laura than what we saw with Delta. All right, so we're here in Pecan Island. We rode out the storm in Lafayette, and I want to bring in the Mayor President, Josh Guillory. Thanks for joining us today, Josh. Tell us right now the status on the city as a whole.
Hey, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you guys. So, yeah, we were hit pretty hard with the Hurricane Delta, a lot harder than Hurricane Laura. Right now, our power outages is our number one focus. After we did our search and rescue, made sure that there was no threat to life, we move on to restoring power. Just to put it in perspective, in the city of Lafayette, our utility systems, which has about 75,000 customers, we still have just under 30,000 customers that are without power. Within the parish, we're getting reports of significant power outages. So that's our number one concern. We're going to go ahead and put another curfew in tonight from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. Just to make sure that we keep our roadways safe.
Do you have an idea on how long some of these folks may be without power? Are we looking at a couple of days, or are we looking at weeks?
In some areas, it could be a couple of days. So we're asking everybody to be patient. We're very proud of the efforts that took. We have an emergency plan. We have crews from Gainesville. We have crews from North Carolina working with our utility system, our Lafayette utility system workers here locally. So these guys were prepped, they were rested, they were ready, and they hit the ground running. The nanosecond it was safe for them to get out there, which was even before daybreak. So really proud of our guys, our first responders.
So we know Lafayette has taken in a lot of people displaced from Laura and Lake Charles and some of the neighboring communities, and they've been kind of housing them in hotels. Have there been any shelters that have been needing to be opened for people who may be displaced now or don't have power or regular necessities?
Yeah, that's a good question. So our governor in Hurricane Laura made it clear that he did not want open shelters. So what we did was we worked with our GOSEP office, our Office of Emergency Personnel out of Baton Rouge. They worked very hard to make sure that people were in hotels. So as far as a shelter right now, we kind of learned from Hurricane Laura that in Rapides Parish, just north of Lafayette Parish, there's a mega shelter. And when that shelter overflows, or at some point, they're going to work with in conjunction with Orleans Parish to transport people that were displaced. But look, what you have here in Louisiana, South Louisiana, you have a regional approach. We're very proud to work with our friends in Calcasieu and Cameron Parish and across the South.
Thank you so much, Mayor President Josh Guillory. Thanks for that update. We know Lafayette will come back stronger and better than ever before, and the power will get restored along with all the downed trees and lines that we're seeing here across the community. But overall, faring fairly well aside from the power outages, and good to know that for the most part, everybody's been accounted for. I want to head back into studio now, Julie, and again, crazy to think the weather's so beautiful and calm now. Just 10 hours ago, it was a very different story.
It sure was, and we want to get the very latest now on the response. And joining us now from Washington, D.C. is FEMA Administrator Pete Gaynor. Pete, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk with us. Can you tell us what FEMA's biggest priorities are right now?
Well, our role is to support the states, so whether it's Texas, Louisiana, or Mississippi, in their response and recovery from Delta. So we have the entire federal family down there to include all our partners, making sure that, and I think that I think your previous reporter hit on it, it's about power. About 634,000 without power from Texas to Louisiana to Mississippi. The greatest amount, obviously, Louisiana with about 470,000 without power today. So power first, but even before power, it's about safety. So if you've been impacted by Delta, you really need to think about your safety, the safety of the family, and the safety of first responders that are out there today. Heed the directions of your local emergency managers. Don't come out till you get the all clear.
And, you know, this has been such a tough season. Many of these families there in Louisiana now facing their second disaster, first Laura and now Delta. So what should they know about seeking FEMA help for a second time at this point?
Right. This has been a complicated season. It gets a little bit more complicated now in Louisiana with both Laura and Delta. So what we're doing today, supporting the state, we're doing damage assessments. That may take probably till tomorrow morning to kind of see what the impacts of Delta are. The governor will most likely make a request to the president for a major disaster, and then we'll pour in all the things that come with that. So whether it's individual assistance, public assistance, but we still have a little ways to go. So if you're impacted by Delta, do a couple things today. Take photos of damage, write it all down on a list, and save all your receipts, and call your insurance company. If you do those four things, you'll be ahead of the power curve once we get a major disaster, potentially for Delta.
I know that you'll also be heading into that region and taking a look at the damage yourself. When it comes to the damage, do you think some of this will be difficult to determine whether or not this was from Laura or from Delta?
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be some parts of Louisiana parishes that were not impacted by Laura that impacted by Delta will be clear. Again, I think you're right on the topic here. How do you separate out Laura damage from Delta damage? We have plenty of experts. We'll work towards those solutions. It's not easy. These things are not easy typically. This just makes it a little bit difficult, but I'm highly confident we'll get to a solution that meets all disaster survivors' needs.
And lastly, just talk about the response in the immediate future here in the next few days.
So again, on the ground, I had today about 1,500 FEMA employees that have been down there for Delta. For Laura 6 weeks ago, Sally in the Panhandle. So lots of federal employees down there, lots of our federal partners, to include power restoration. In Louisiana alone, about 8,200 restoration crews. They had been down there doing power restoration for Laura. They're there. To include the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers who did Blue Roof Mission. They're still there. So I think we have a head start, and hopefully you'll see progress pretty quickly.
All right, that's FEMA Administrator Pete Gaynor. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us today, and a lot of work ahead, I'm sure. All right, we want to get it back out now live to Mike Seidel. He is in Scott, Louisiana. Mike, a lot of work ongoing there on the ground.
Well, the chainsaws are up and running here in Scott like they are across Louisiana because of tree damage. With those winds clocked over at Lake Charles, 95, 96 miles an hour. Here nearby Lafayette, 75 miles an hour hurricane force. And the wind here really roared through this area after the rain ended. We had 3.5 inches of rain. That's a record rainfall. And a lot less rain than we had with Laura, but more wind. And this is this hackberry tree we've been showing throughout the morning and now early afternoon. Robert and Susan James live here. They've lived here for 30 years. They put a new roof on last November after a thunderstorm, and they got away from the shingle roof, which is a great idea. These roofs are much, much better in dealing with wind versus shingles getting blown off with a 50 or 60 mile an hour wind gust. The roof looks like it's in pretty good shape. We've got another tree in the back, a smaller tree, but what has really been hit is his prized classic car collection. We've got 3 Lincolns, we got a Monte Carlo. This is a 1977 Cartier. You can see the little porthole back here. That is pretty cool. And it's only got 19,000 miles on it, so it's a low mileage car, but this is the one that got hit the hardest. He can get them fixed. In fact, he told us earlier that they were in the process of getting these trees taken out, and they just didn't get far enough along. In fact, right here, we got the chainsaw, and this tree has recently been cut down. So just not quite enough time, but they did get out of the home, the mobile home, as they've been instructed to. They said they watched the Weather Channel. They knew to get out of harm's way, and I'm glad they did. They're okay. There are no injuries or fatalities here in Scott. The power is slowly coming back on statewide now. About 10% of those nearly 600,000 customers without power are now back on. We've got great weather for the next several days, and the wind is not an issue anymore because last night, even after the rain ended, the winds just howled. We had gusts here over 50 miles an hour till after midnight, and you just can't get the bucket trucks back up. So let's go back to Carl Parker. You've got the latest on Delta and what's it's doing now, and the new tornado watch now includes parts of Alabama, Georgia, and a good deal of the western side of Atlanta because of Delta, the instability, and the moisture.
Yeah, that's right, Mike. But before you go, I wanted to ask you, have you had a chance to get out and look around? I'm just wondering, how widespread that tree damage and if there's any structural damage around that area. All right, I guess Mike is not able to hear us. So let's just go ahead and talk about what's going on here with the satellite picture. And you can see very clearly, if you were with us at the top, what's going on with the storm. This time of year, you're going to have this clash of seasons. And in orange there, that is drier, cooler air that started to tangle with this storm, the wind shear rapidly increasing as it was nearing landfall. And so we saw a rapid weakening of the system over the last 24 hours as it's moved up and into Mississippi. So it made landfall last night at 6 p.m. Central Time as a Category 2. That makes 4 landfalls in Louisiana, and there's only been one other year in the record when that has occurred. So this is a record for landfalls, most landfalls in a season in Louisiana. And again, right now we're looking at a tropical depression. There's the forecast for what is left of the storm to come up through the Tennessee Valley and into the Ohio Valley there. Right now we are looking at this severe weather threat. There is some ongoing wind and some heavier rain near Memphis, Tennessee. Winds now gusting to nearly 30 miles per hour in Jackson. And there is the new tornado watch that Mike was talking about, that extending through eastern parts of Alabama, northwest Georgia, into the Atlanta metro as well. So there's going to be a threat for damaging winds, 60-mile-per-hour wind, and a few tornadoes in this watch area, which is going until 8 o'clock tonight. Now, you'll notice there's been a fair amount of cloud around in North Georgia that's just beginning to thin out a little bit. And so as we see more breaks in the cloud there's going to be more potential for stronger storms. We're certainly seeing more of that in southern Alabama and southwest Georgia, and some individual cells here that are starting to look a little bit more interesting. So we'll want to keep our eyes on those. Certainly plenty of wind shear in place here, winds coming out of different directions at different heights, and limited instability, but that is going to be growing by the hour. So Julie, 3 out of 10 on our Torcon centered over Georgia and eastern Alabama. Over to you.
Okay, and you know, Delta, as Carl mentioned, now moving into the southeast, going to be wet, it's going to be gusty in places like Nashville and Atlanta, and you'll see that kind of morning in Jackson, Mississippi, what's like what you woke up to anyway, with the sheets of rain and the really gusty winds there. Look at those flags just flying around. All right, so we're going to be looking at Memphis here. Timing this out, already getting some rain in Memphis and some wind as well. We'll see more of that this afternoon into this evening as well before we see things continue to settle down a little bit in the latter part of tonight. By tomorrow, looking good here for you in Memphis. Could pick up maybe an inch or so of rainfall out of this as well. So we will be looking at the rain factor here. Birmingham getting hit right now. Going to continue to see those bands push throughout the afternoon. And by the time we get into this evening, we do think we'll still see some scattered pockets of storms, but things will start to settle down once we get into the wee early morning hours tomorrow, and certainly into Sunday. It looks like a much better day for you here in Birmingham. Atlanta, as we were just talking about, does face that tornado threat. We will see the rain start to move in 6, maybe a little bit earlier than that in some of those western suburbs, and continue on in with some severe storms highly possible. All right, let's get back out now in the field to Chris Bruin. And Chris, looks nice there now, but we know that was not the case not too long ago.
No, weather's nice for those who don't have power. They can open the windows up, but the surge has really done a number on communities that were very hard hit. You can see kind of what's left of what the water brought up from the Gulf of Mexico has inundated a lot of the local coastal communities.
Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we. Get the information you need to stay safe every day, right here on the Weather Channel.
All right, I want to show you some video out of Lake Charles, Louisiana, some flood water, and this person biking through it. Sometimes you have no idea what is in these waters, and even just from the people that we've talked to, It's never a good idea to kind of walk through. Now, sometimes you're kind of trapped. If you're trying to get out to a safe place, you kind of have to. Other times, if you're just trying to get from point A to point B, you need to take that detour just for safety reasons, especially even biking. There's a lot of bacteria and even debris and things that can really cut you up and hurt you if you're out exposed in it. Now, we're in Pecan Island. That's right on the coast. You can see the Gulf of Mexico. It's about 3.5 miles to our south, right there on the horizon. Essentially from here to there, though, it's all water because of the surge that's slowly starting to drain out. Now, this is a marshland that typically has water in it, but what you're noticing is, look at the grass. I mean, all the grass from the tree line all the way up to the building. The water brought all of that and uprooted all that grass and covered the road. Now, the road was completely covered when we got here. Locals and residents took out all their trailers and whatever they could to kind of remove it and get that open as quick as possible. Carl, I know we're going back to you. I heard you ask Mike Seidel how extensive the damage is. Does it look like there's trees down everywhere? Well, I can tell you from our drive, we stayed in Lafayette and then came down here, which is about a 60-mile drive, and I wouldn't say it's widespread. You have trees down occasionally in one yard, none in the other. Not widespread tree damage, certainly. Here at the coast, the damage is a lot worse than what we're seeing once you go about 15 miles inland and you get a little bit more of that friction. So while the winds were strong and the power outages really, I think, the biggest ordeal there in Lafayette, you have just spotty damage in pockets and not widespread over the whole city.
Yeah, you know, it certainly seems like maybe there were mostly strong tropical storm force winds sustained, but then winds gusting over hurricane force in a lot of areas, and that's why you're seeing that more sort of spotty damage around. Chris, thank you so much. And let's take a look at the latest on the storm. You see the center of circulation there in Mississippi. There is now a flash flood warning, brand new flash flood warning along 55 and east, and that for Lafayette and Panola, Yalobusha counties. And you see the heavy rain that's been falling there for the last couple of hours, and also been coming down in Memphis, so I'd be looking out for some possible high water in that area. We are still seeing some gusty winds still gusting now to about 30 miles per hour in Jackson and also in Montgomery. And the concern along that line there near Montgomery is severe weather. There's a tornado watch in effect in east central parts of Alabama, as well as into North Georgia. That does include much of the Atlanta metro area, so we're looking for a few tornadoes and also 60-mile-per-hour wind in that watch going until 8 o'clock tonight. And as you look at the radar picture right now and satellite combined, there's been a lot of cloud cover in Atlanta, and that is lingering now, but as we see a few more breaks in that cloud cover, we expect that there will be a little more potential for some strong storms later this afternoon. Well, winds gusted to more than 80 miles per hour in Jennings, Louisiana, causing widespread damage, and our own Paul Goodlow is there for us, showing us the damage in the daylight.
Well, another day of cleanup begins here in Louisiana after yet another named system made landfall. We had Laura, Hurricane Laura, about 6 weeks ago, and then about, say, 16, 20 hours ago, we had landfall of Hurricane Delta. Now you see the aftermath, trees down everywhere, and cleanup continues. We're in Jennings, Louisiana. We're about halfway between Lake Charles, about 45 miles to the west of us, and Lafayette, about, say, 40 miles east of us here. And we were in the eye wall last night with very strong winds to do damage like this. And these are pine trees, so it's a softer wood. But yeah, the softening was really the ground here. We had at least a half a foot of rain. Some areas here are closing in on a foot of rain, so it softened the soil. So we're talking these root balls of the trees, well, it's like trying to anchor something as, you know, over 30 feet tall, over probably 40 years old, to something that is the consistency of a sponge, which this ground is right now. You see how huge the root ball is, but also look at this branch, which was impaled into the soft ground. So the winds last night for a couple of hours were gusting well over 60 miles per hour for maybe an hour or so, 75 to over 80 mile per hour wind gusts as that northern eye wall kind of slammed this area. As that passed, we had the center, kind of a dirty center, not blue sky or clear skies, or we had some light rain and clouds. And the backside, not heavy rain, but strong winds coming in from the other direction, which knocked this tree down. So we got strong winds on the front and back side of the system. And by the way, this tree was actually leaning against these power poles. This is close to this elementary school. Power crew out here making sure the lines were not live, and they weren't. They grounded those, but still, then they cut the tree down. You just see one little limb lingering here in the power lines, which still don't have energy in them yet. That's the ongoing process now, is trying to restore power to this neighborhood, as well as most of the city of Jennings, still without power right now for the second time so far in not even 2 months, dealing with the cleanup in the aftermath of a landfalling hurricane.
Well, stay with the Weather Channel for continuing coverage of Delta. We'll be on with you until 9 Eastern tonight.
And a sad night unfolding here in Louisiana. If you're just tuning in and wondering what the scope of the damage is, that's what we're here to do. Again, we're with you before, during, and after a storm. And we want to show you all as much as we can. There's so much land that has been impacted. It's hard to be one person and be around. That's why we got teams in all different communities showing what exactly happened, how bad was the storm during the height of it, and what the damage looks like afterwards to keep you and your family safe, especially for those who evacuated. Remember, this area under an evacuation order, and so a lot of people essentially, they didn't ride out the storm here in Pecan Island. This is Pecan Island. The Gulf of Mexico sits about 3.5 miles off in the distance, and the remaining water you see standing here, especially on this side of the road, that's just left over from the surge. It takes a long time for the surge to go down, and this road was completely covered in water. Even just a few hours ago, we can show you drone footage and kind of show you what it looked like when we arrived. I mean, the grass was completely covered over. You can see the mounds that locals have piled on the side of the road just to allow way in to some of the homes or residences down that way, and also an access. If you were to go about 30 minutes or so, you would run into some of those communities there in Cameron Parish, like Creole and also Cameron. Of course, that's where we had landfall from both Laura and also now Hurricane Delta officially making landfall in Creole, Louisiana. That's only about 40 miles off to our west. Very similar type scene. So we know, Carl, the surge was not as high as what we had with Laura, because if you remember, Creole, Louisiana, and then the community just to the east, Grand Chenard, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but something along those lines, that's where we had that 17-plus foot storm surge with Hurricane Laura. We're not getting that type of results this go around. And from my perspective, this area had big surge, but we're not seeing anything structurally sort of removed, aside from just sheds and things that you would typically think of, even in tropical storm force winds, but no real homes removed completely off of their foundations.
Really good to hear. And Chris, you got it exactly right, I know, because I heard from a Twitter follower that, in fact, it is Grand Chenard. That is the correct pronunciation. Thank you so much, Chris. And
okay,
let's
good to know. I needed clarification.
And let's take a look at the latest on the storm. And notice I've got a couple of flash flood warnings now in northern Mississippi, so that will be an ongoing threat. And we're also looking at a severe threat, and there is now a tornado watch in effect in eastern parts of Alabama and also in North Georgia, including the Atlanta metro area, that going until 8 o'clock tonight. When you look at the satellite and radar combined, there's still a lot of cloud around in Atlanta. If that continues to be the case, that's definitely going to help things out. But notice there are some breaks on the southwest side. The more breaks that we see, the warmer it gets, and the more that raises the stakes for potential strong thunderstorms and maybe even tornadoes. And then to the south, a little more sunshine down here. We are seeing some stronger storms now south of 65. And when we look at the velocity data, I want you to notice these two areas, these two spins that are moving up. One now moving right across, just crossed 82, and the other one just east of 331. So those are two rotating thunderstorms. No tornado warnings on those as of yet. I'm sure the Weather Service is watching it very, very carefully, but already we are seeing rotating thunderstorms. Not a surprise, given that we've got plenty of shear in the atmosphere. And so we'll take another look at this coming up in just a few minutes. But first, Mike Seidel has the latest from Scott, Louisiana. Mike?
Hurricane Delta made landfall Friday evening along the Louisiana coast, their fourth landfall of the season. knocking out power to almost 600,000 customers. And here in Scott, about 90% of the population without power. Trees down on some homes, including this mobile home the James family have lived in for 30 years. Now, they did get a new roof in November, and it's not a shingle roof, the aluminum roof. It's in much better shape. They evacuated, which you're supposed to do when you're in a mobile home, but this hackberry tree came down and destroyed. At least one of these cars is in pretty bad shape. This is their 76 Lincoln Cartier, only 19,000 miles, but the cars can be fixed. They're okay, and the sun is out today. Well, what a storm. The strongest winds came in on the backside after the rain had ended. Peak gust here was hurricane force at 75 miles an hour. But no injuries here in Scott and no fatalities. I'm meteorologist Mike Seidel, the Weather Channel in Scott, Louisiana.
All right, like to hear that about the no injuries. Team coverage continuing all day here on the Weather Channel. We also have Reynolds Wolf. He is going to be live in Greenville. Also, Paul Goodlow out there, Chris Bruin, Justin Michaels, and Tevin Wooten.
Get your daily dose of everything weather.
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
Supposed to count the rings to find the age of a tree. I've counted these rings. I was cut from the taller part of this tree. So you can see there's definitely maybe another 10, if not more, years of growth that's going on here, because it wasn't just the winds. It was a combination of the winds and the heavy rain. This ground here is just saturated. Or if I step too close to it, it's like a water bed, because the water is very, very high. When the grass ends, nothing but water here. So that softened the root mass here. And when the winds came in, howling in from the east with the eye wall last night, it took that tree and pushed it right across the road. In fact, it was hanging on some of the power lines here for a while, so some crews knocked back down. Now this tree looks like the back of the eye wall. The back edge came through after we went through the eye. And then we had our wind shift from the west, which is coming from this direction, and knocked this tree down, which I have a little section from. But now the cleanup continues. This has been quite the year here in just Louisiana alone. This is now the fourth time we've been impacted by a named system. The most notorious so far this year was Hurricane Laura, a Category 4, which devastated Lake Charles, which, by the way, is about 45 miles to the west of us. We saw impacts here in Jennings, Louisiana, but Delta came closer. But Delta was only a Category 2 hurricane, but still substantial damage here. Power is still out across the area. And if this is what a 2 does, people here are happy they didn't have to go through a 4. That's what their neighbors to the west went to go through. But now we still have another cleanup. And what a year it's been. Delta, the fourth letter in the Greek alphabet. We went to the Greek alphabet because we exhausted the other 22 names of this year. So 26 name storm. It is our 9th hurricane. It is our 3rd major hurricane. And by the way, it is also the 10th storm now, named system, to make landfall here in the U.S. If you're with me, you can't wait till this hurricane season and this year comes to an end.
Quite the year indeed. Well, Hurricane Delta is certainly unwelcome in places like Lake Charles, Louisiana. Still in the beginning of cleanup and rebuilding after Hurricane Laura made a direct hit just 6 weeks ago. Now Delta has added insult to injury with more down power lines, water damage, and it's putting residents here back to square one. Our Tevin Wooten and Justin Michaels were in Lake Charles for Delta's landfall last night. Take a look.
We lost power at about 5:30. That as a 75-mile-an-hour wind gust came through, and that knocked out power at least to here at this property and the neighboring property, which is the LeBaire. So I can't speak for the entire town, although I do think about 18,000 customers. And it looks like we just lost portions of power again. The rainfall has been relentless, so much so that we have broken a daily rainfall record. 7.5 inches is how much rain has fallen today. A lot of that, Steph, has actually fallen within the last, I would say, 3 or 4 hours.
Hey, I'll tell you what, right now, conditions are not great here, Mr. Mike Bettis. We know we could be in the western eye wall for quite a long time, maybe another hour, 2 hours. So as this thing continues to push off to the northeast, we still have a lot of weather to go through here in Lake Charles.
Rough night there. Delta moving on now inland. Here's a look at our future radar. Memphis getting some rain already today, but expecting to see those bands push throughout the afternoon. The remainder of the afternoon and through this evening and even into the late night hours, not out of the question. We could still be dealing with some wet weather here in Memphis. So could pick up maybe an inch or so out of this. Not a huge flood concern here, but again, something to be aware of in those low-lying areas. What about Nashville? The storm moving on will impact you here in Nashville by the time we get into tomorrow, certainly looking at tomorrow night, and then perhaps getting some thunderstorms coming on in right behind it. So that would be Monday, Tuesday of this week. Atlanta, there is a tornado threat your way this evening. Looks like the rain, the possible severe weather pushes in late afternoon, early evening. This is 6 o'clock, looking at certainly some pockets of strong storms pushing through and maybe lasting for a few hours. And with that, we do have a tornadic threat, about a 3 on our Torcon here for the Atlanta Metro. We clear things off, though, by Sunday morning here in Atlanta. A lot of this moisture, by the way, is going to work its way as well into the Appalachians, so we are concerned about flooding once we get into the Appalachian chain. Atlanta, for you, about an inch of rainfall coming your way and in the surrounding areas. Charlotte, this is another area where we're going to be looking at some gusty weather, also some of that rain working its way in Sunday and through Sunday night. So again, the Delta keeps going here, bringing that moisture and actually meeting up with even more tropical moisture here. Even as we get into the Northeast, New York City, Sunday night into Monday night, you'll be getting some of this rain as well. Some of this combining with a cold front that's also going to be pushing on in. So that's going to trigger some ample, perhaps storms. But again, Memphis already getting the rain today, the gusty weather. So make sure that you take good care there. And we're going to keep you posted on where Delta tracks beyond. Don't forget, you can get even more coverage of Hurricane Delta right here on social media. Be sure to check out Pattern. That's got everything from Twitter to Snapchat. We've got it all for you here at the Weather Channel.
It's almost unbelievable this is real.
When your cameras roll, our experts react.
Jaw-dropping.
Weather Gone Viral. Tomorrow night at 9 here on the Weather Channel.
Thanks for joining us here on this Saturday afternoon. Again, if you're just joining us and kind of getting a grasp on, okay, what's happened now that Delta has made landfall, we're showing you the aftermath and some of the remnant damage and surge, or at least signs of some big surge. The water is essentially receded back to where it started, and the Gulf of Mexico is about 3.5 miles that direction. That's south. We're in Pecan Island. It's about an hour and a half south and west of Lafayette. And what you're looking at, it looks to be a big body of